Okay, so I've just received this document which I haven't had a chance to read it yet. It's about 13 pages. It's the foundations and importance of law, exploring the right to petition and its relation to society. Introduction. So this is what Velma B has written for me at my request, with my input, and she's got like a PhD. She's also got a master's in law, so she's checked it all for accuracy, and then she's written down what she's found out and what she thinks, based around what input I elaborated on certain points and wanted her to focus on. But what I wanted to make this video now about, if I've got a chance, is I just wanted to... This is to do with what the government write, the ministers. And I'd made a previous video and I ended up getting a bit annoyed and I lost my temper a little bit and I got a bit over passionate, a bit over enthusiastic. And I ended up having a bit of a kind of like annoyed sort of debate about the fact that, the military is meant to be for our defence, yet we pay for it and fund it, and they've got these £150 million tanks to protect the country. But does the country end up getting protected? And what's happened now that these foreign interests and our own companies are all being bought up by one entity, and they seem to have interest in just, with pure financial power, buying land and buildings in areas and doing what they want with it, to the kind of like the public don't seem to be on a fair footing anymore, and even the big platforms aren't helping out. They put a lot of restrictions on what you can post, or even they're starting to say that, they're starting to claim that you don't have political freedom of speech to publish on private platforms, which I think is contrary. I don't think that they're allowed to intervene in an electoral process or legal process. If they want to have a publishing, it's meant to be for everyone. But that's separate. Anyway, one of the main points was the fact that we've got party political bias now. And traditionally, historically, the MPs, we didn't even have a parliament. Many times people just petitioned matters straight to the king, and they even petitioned to have a parliament called together. So it's actually more important than electing the MPs, and it predates that, really. It's our right, and the MPs really are undermining it. And I just wanted to indicate, I wanted to read this, which is, it's a PDF file, it's government information. It's basically a government pamphlet. And I drew attention to two sections of this pamphlet. The history of petitions, according to the ministers, according to the elected ministers. Many of these ministers don't actually have qualifications, and they only take advice. Many times they take advice from advisors, lawyers, or the Ministry of Justice, who have their own interests, not necessarily our interests. And then this other section here, 7, is debating the rules, the development of petitioning. I always, when I tried to do this yesterday, I ended up going off on a tangent, and I guess I've started on a bit of a tangent now. Hold on, I'm going to put the lights on. Okay, I wanted to put the torch on the phone, but I've ended up putting the main lights on. So I'll link to this document. I'll try to zoom in on it a little bit. It says history of petitions. And then we've got development of petitioning and debating the rules, number of petitions. So I'll just read what it says. It has been argued that Parliament originated in meetings of the King's Council where petitions were considered. Well, actually, so it says it has been argued that Parliament originated in meetings of the King's Council where petitions were considered. But how they write that, I don't like that sentence in how it's written, because it never mentions the people and the subjects and their rights at all. This is a government document by MPs. So immediately, I believe that this information pamphlet serves to undermine the rights of the subjects and the people. It's been argued, so Parliament like debating and arguing things with each other, but they end up arguing, debating things with us even before we get them into Parliament. It's as if they're debating with us what we can and can't do, rather than we tell them what to debate and then they debate it with each other. They're almost kind of like moving the debate to the threshold of Parliament to even be able to submit. They're moving the threshold there, and for party political opposition reasons, when really they are meant to represent us. We go to our local surgery with our MP, or we submit things to the committee. They just now have a very rejective and opposing outlook, and I believe that is demonstrated in these papers and how they're written. So it's been argued that, there's this argued word that Parliament originated in meetings of the King's Council where petitions were considered. Well, how about it's clear that petitioning is a long-established procedure that many people, witnesses from the contemporary period, report as being a long-established natural right of order that developed into setting grievances to the king from the subjects, and has always been so. And then they ended up getting people to represent them, electing people. Because there's no actual, there's not really an argument about that. I think it's quite clear. The only arguing that goes on now is actually the debates in the chamber in Parliament, and they don't really debate with the king, because the Commons does all the debating, and they get it checked with the Lords, have to approve it and check it. They can send it back for changing, but they don't really debate. The Commons doesn't debate with the House of Lords. They have to just check it. They can send it back, but that's hardly a debate. And what I find is that, maybe the Petitions Committee can check things and send them back to us. But, when you reject it, the petition, they don't give you a chance to reformulate it. You've got to completely and totally resubmit it, and you lose your 5 signatures. A lot of the times they claim they don't understand what it's asking, but it's very clear that what you're asking. And sometimes they say they can't do what you're asking when they can. For example, with the 15-minute cities, they could even make legislation easily to make certain procedures so councils can't have 15-minute cities, or make it hard for them to have them without the approval of people first, or not just a consultation, because consultations don't even have to really be acted on the results. They're just to gather an idea, like a proper referendum, or, people have to ask for it themselves, not council directive, strategic planning, origin of strategic planning. Rather, everything should be origin of the people that they call for, not these development contractors and so forth. Calling all the shots because they've got the money. Should be the people asking for what they want, not political parties coming up with ideas, or these secretive strategic planning phases, all these different phases that we aren't really involved in. They don't originate from us. I'm going to try. I don't think I'm going to get through this if I keep going off on tangents. The first known petitions to the Lords and to both Houses of Parliament date from the reign of Richard II. I think that's 1300 period, but seem to have become widespread from the reign of Henry onwards. Seem to become of widespread. Well, we've got committees being used in Parliament in 1640, before the Tumultuous Petitioning Act and before the right to petition. And at these times, Parliament wasn't necessarily always permanent. It was only called Parliament and then dissolved. So you need some legal means to petition the king when you don't have elected representatives, and it predates that anyway, before even we had immunity and protection for doing it. So they're saying that the first known ones to the Lords and to both houses date from the reign of Richard II, but what about the king? The main part of it all is petitioning the king, but they're only mentioning both houses there in the reign of Richard II, not actually saying to the kings. They're not letting on if they know of earlier records of people petitioning the monarch directly before that period. They're saying in 1571 a committee of motions of griefs and petitions was first appointed. So that's 1571. Now, was that committee when they had a parliament or when they didn't have a parliament? And is the Lord of the Articles there? Are these three justices from the 1661 Tumultuous Act or the grand jury there? What impact does that on whether there is a parliament or not a parliament? Because if there isn't a parliament called, then you'll need facilitators and people to check things if you're petitioning the king. If you've got parliament formed, then you can have committees in parliament to deal with these things. So I think that needs exploring. Parliaments, holding parliaments and not holding parliaments, or when parliament was dissolved and not there, what bearing and relation does that have on the when they had the Lord of the Articles, or from 1661 when they had the three justices and a grand jury to check things? And obviously clearly after that went all the way up to 1986, the 1661 Tumultuous Petitioning Act. But obviously they got rid of the Lord of the Articles, and maybe that was because, is that to do with a parliament becoming more frequent and permanent? I think that's important to look into. We don't really have any information from pre-conquest, do we? And this is a little bit off subject, but Howard Crowhurst has examined all the measurements of Stonehenge, and he has deduced that mathematically there is lots of sacred mathematics in it that set out the origins of the clock, the 60 seconds and 60 minutes on the clock, and even all of the complicated trigonometry and other mathematics. And the Greeks are accredited for this, and Pythagoras and so forth. It turns out that the Celts had all this mathematics, and they didn't write it down. So we're getting the Greeks accredited for this complicated and technical mathematics when Stonehenge, for example, actually uses these very complicated mathematical calculations and uses them to measure the motions of the heavens and set out calendars and so forth. But they just never write it down. But you can read the monuments, and then we work out the mathematics from it. The Howard Crowhurst just put 4 brand new videos that literally have just been up in the last few weeks, and they referred to it as the Temple of Apollo. Well, Apollo is the god of sun. So they did acknowledge that there was a Temple of Apollo, which is of the sun, in Britain. And they're saying that they danced there for celebrations. So it's suggestive that Stonehenge was the Temple of the Sun, and also of, all these calculations and mathematics, to measure all the movements of the heavens. And it was predating, all the Greek mathematicians by thousands of years. So that's just an example. So there could well be a right to settle grievances, with the Druids or with the king or with the chieftains. And that is what a lot of witnesses in these contemporary works that, Professor Karen Bowie has drawn his attention to, that they were all talking about and referring of a natural right or an ancient sacred right for grievances, which it was based on. And even some of the kings weren't too familiar with some of these processes anyway, from what Karen Bowie was writing. But we've got this 1571 committee and motions. We know that they were in the 1740s. They were having committees in Parliament to deal with permissions and asking members of the public to bring evidence and so forth. When we had these Lords Say and Seal and Warwick and the Lords, Warwick, Say and Seal, Brooke, all these lords and barons who were involved with the Whig side, the opposition to the Crown, which led into the war. In fact, a lot of the lords were probably as responsible, if not more responsible, than Oliver Cromwell himself, but they don't get mentioned as much. Oliver Cromwell is the person who gets all of the historical reference, when there were quite a few members of the Houses of Lords involved in that, and they were running some of these committees in Parliament. In medieval times, receivers and triers of petitions were appointed by Parliament to collect petitions. So I don't know how does that revert to the Lord of the Articles? And then you've also got the three justices or grand jury and so forth. Receiving triers of petitions, well, it's like trying the information, were appointed by Parliament to collect petitions. Well, they didn't judge them though. It's claiming here that some cases would be referred to local courts. Major matters were reserved for Parliament itself. Well, I think that they are misleading us on that. I believe that when it's saying receivers and triers of petitions, you get divorced by petition in a civil court. Petition is the word for case, to bring a case. I believe that, we've got to look at civil cases, civil disputes, either civil cases to and against the government in local areas, civil cases against other persons, third parties, and then we've got criminal cases, claims against people for breaking the law. I don't think that if you look into this, in medieval times, receivers and triers of petitions were appointed by Parliament to collect petitions. Some cases would be referred to local courts. Well, is that mixing in civil disputes and civil cases rather than actual petitions to the King or either of House of Parliament, for the important matters? Major matters were reserved for Parliament itself. Well, that's what now we have. Major matters are reserved for Parliament itself. That's what we regard as petitioning the government now, as major matters. And that is why I think the 1688 bill is focused on the major matters. I think that the 1688 bill is focused on the major matters to Parliament and the King. I don't think it's focused on civil disputes between other parties or criminal cases, really. Here, I think that they're trying to make it sound like that these receivers and triers of petitions would collect them and refer them to local courts, as if the local courts could decide matters, yet matters can only be debatable and decidable in Parliament. And that's to do with things like whether you can have a public inquiry or not, or whether you want laws made or changed, if you want a pardon from the King, or if you had matters. You see, a petition wouldn't be referred to a local court if you had a dispute about the courts or about the whole court system or about the law or about changing the law, because this is the thing with appeals. You get an order in a magistrate's court and then you appeal it to a Crown Court, and then it was meant to be that the House of Lords was the highest court of appeal by petition, and you didn't even need the Appealite Jurisdiction Acts for that. We didn't need the Tumultuous Petitioning Act for that. But they seem to have, when Gordon Brown in 2010 in the Labour Parliament abolished the Appeal Jurisdiction Act, of which there was a few of them, they tried to make out that you can't appeal to Parliament anymore. You can't petition a case that was heard in the courts to the House of Lords. You have to do it to the Supreme Court. But you never needed the Appeal Jurisdiction Act for that. And you never needed the right to petition for that. And you never needed the Tumultuous Petitioning Act for that. Obviously, if you're petitioning the King for something that had already been heard in a local court, then why would it be referred to a local court if you have got a dispute with a local court, which is the basis of higher appeal? Or if there is corruption in there, evil judges or evil ministers or whatever, or you want the law changing, or you want a pardon which the monarch can grant and so forth. So we already know that this whole, why would you submit a petition to Parliament petition website? They don't refer things to local courts. In fact, they now say that they can't accept petitions that about judicial matters, which that I believe is a major lie. Since they also try to hide the petitions to the Lords, and they don't let you publish petitions to the Lords on the online website. There's a lot of subversion going on. It would be nice to get someone to really, 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 really scrutinise each of these points. I'd love to get someone full-time working on this, to actually unravel the ball of wool, to get the absolute matter of facts absolutely clear about what is what. So then we just don't get this information form kind of trying to pass it off like, if you're doing a petition to Parliament and if you break the law, then you should be tried in a normal court, or it's matters that, you see, they've just had a court case about 2 or 3 months ago. I was speaking out about the fact that, Extinction Rebellion are giving evidence of the environment or the cause that they're petitioning about to the courts, but the courts can't make a decision on the environment or changing the law of the environment. So why are they raising those matters? And now they actually made an order so they can't discuss it or talk about it. So what they've started doing now is they've started saying that these companies and businesses are breaking the law instead. But that shouldn't really be a defence, because the matter of fact is, are your actions covered by a right or not? When people are engaged, and can the courts even hear these cases? Was it even referred by Parliament? If the police brought charges against someone when they're involved in petitioning, that police case against the petitioners wasn't referred by Parliament. I strongly believe that the committees in Parliament are meant to deal with these, just like when you want an inquiry. In fact, if there's a very, very big campaign active that people are involved in, large numbers of people, there should be a committee set up either to deal with all these campaigns or a committee for each campaign. That's how important and serious it is. Once you start getting things happening like the suffragettes movement or Extinction Rebellion and so forth. And like I said earlier, what bearing does this, dissolving Parliament and then calling a Parliament and then dissolving a Parliament, what bearing did that have on the petitions and this Master of Lord of Articles or the 3 justices and the grand jury role to play in it? Obviously not after 1986 when that 1661 Act was abolished. I'm not keen on the language, because they're always playing it down. They're always playing down our rights, and they're always playing up the right honourable member of Parliament all the time. When this process is that they're making Parliament sound more important than this specific process, which is now specially protected and precedes Parliament. It's more important than calling the MPs. And in fact, when you're getting signatures that in number outweigh the number of votes that an MP gets to be elected even, then you are, you're putting a very large weight of public concern on a case which is greater than the public support that a member got to become elected, which is usually under 100,000, but yet they make you get over 100,000 signatures to get a debate in Parliament. With the increase in the influence and importance of Parliament, here we go, with the influence and importance of Parliament during the reign of Charles I, petitioning became one of the main methods of airing grievances by those classes not represented in Parliament. This is wrong. This is completely and totally wrong. How dare they? How dare they? With the increase in the influence and importance of, the influence of them over us and their political parties, it should say with the increase of the political parties and the influence of the corporate, and the importance of political parties and their self-importance with their right honourable titles, and when Parliament became permanently assembled, when we didn't actually, disassemble it, of Parliament during the reign of Charles I, petitioning only became one of the main methods of airing grievances. No, it always was and always had been one of the main methods of airing grievances by those classes not represented in Parliament. And by the way, those classes not represented in Parliament, what is the House of Commons? Well, that's the next sentence begins with the House of Commons, ironically enough. Well, all classes are represented in Parliament. That's what the Commons is meant to be. Represented, full-time representation. Those classes not represented in Parliament. Well, we were represented without Parliament because we represented ourselves by petition. What actually happened is petitioning actually didn't become one of the main methods of airing grievances. Petitioning was the main method of airing grievances. What happened is it actually became protected. With the increase, you should say, with the increase in the influence and importance of Parliament during the reign of Charles I, petition became one of the main methods of airing grievances by those classes not represented in Parliament. It's absolute tosh. Petitioning from 1688, petitioning became exclusively protected, a archaic and age-old practice that was commonly referred to by the public as a natural right that has always existed, actually got although it had limits in 1661 put on to the amount of people who could support it, and if there was, in 1661, if there were very large numbers of people supporting it, it became an exclusively protected process and procedure, particularly in the light of it being abused by the king and the government, and people were unlawfully persecuted, even for holding meetings or speaking freely. An age-old and archaic process and procedure that predates Parliament, and people had been unjustly treated by the king and governments for engaging in this practice, and it became especially protected. It hardly became one of the main methods of airing. It always was the main method, because there wasn't a Parliament. It became one of the main methods of airing. Electing MPs became the main method. Electing MPs to represent us and having a surgery, the MPs became the main method. That's the truth. Petitioning was the main method, and electing MPs became the main method. And documents like this prove that these MPs are in contempt of that fact, I believe, and seriously undermine it. The House of Commons began to appoint committees specifically to examine petitions. particularly those concerned with religious liberties. Well, actually, it's not all about religious liberties, but, religious actually, they were attacking religions and persecuting people because of the religions, and that became one of the reasons why it was protected, so to not persecute the religions. But I think religious beliefs were just about as important as any beliefs or any matters that were being brought. The House of Commons began to appoint committees specifically to examine petitions. Well, they didn't actually talk about the 3 justices or the grand jury, and they didn't speak about the Lord of Articles either, or the fact that sometimes they were trying to charge us. They were trying to charge us a fee to submit petitions. It would be. I wish they did appoint committees specifically to examine them now. Although they've got the petitions committee, but it doesn't seem to be. It's severely limiting how many words you can type. It refuses to accept evidence. You're not allowed to formulate or compile a strong or compelling case. And for the serious and gravity of the matters that are being brought, major matters were reserved for Parliament itself. But now we're being limited in how many characters we can write, how many words we can write in the petition body, and they refuse to accept off-site links or off-site evidence or off-site documents. I won't even be able to submit this now or attach it if I uploaded it to my Drive or website. This document couldn't even be attached to a petition to Parliament. We can't even argue the rules and law about it openly in public by petitioning the government about what the truth of the matter is. I can't even attach this document in evidence because they won't accept links, and there's nowhere near enough space to accept it. So they're actually handicapping us, and they're disabling our ability to even submit a strong case when these are major matters reserved for Parliament itself. So the hypocrisy of these people, the absolute defiance of these ministers is insulting. It insults the intelligence. It assaults the skill and capacity that anyone may have to put together an argument and submit it to any official judicial process that actually supersedes and is more important than the election of the ministers. And they now place themselves as the ultimate, the only option, the only serious option. They consider themselves the only serious option available to us. And this serious matters reserved for Parliament is subjugated to a over-trimmed, highly censored, highly handicapped, severely undermined online procedure that even the CCB, the Small Claims Court, even it has a greater capacity. Even the Small Claims Court has a greater capacity to start a judicial process online and upload documents. It really is insulting, I think it is. Appoint committee specifically to examine petitions. Well, they haven't put the date on here, did they? Are they referring to this 1571 committee? You see, 1640, when just as we're going into the Civil War, and they're starting to gather the evidence in Parliament, that's, 70, 80, 90, so that's, another 70 years after this, and they've got committees, but then we've got Parliament on and off at that point. The House was not always sympathetic to such petitions. Well, it's not. It's never sympathetic to them now. The only petitions it seems to be sympathetic to is if students, female students, get signatures for Theresa May, MP, so they can change the tampon tax. And then Theresa May is sympathetic to such causes of merely changing the tax on tampons, all you need to do, you don't really need much writ, although you can use 38 degrees or change.org, but they're even withholding the email data from us, and even taking petitions down when it's meant to be a proper judicial process. You want to get it on the actual House of Commons petitions website, and this is why they're censoring them and handicapping people. I don't think they want it to be on the official government website and people to read and see this material, this evidence. They don't want people to associate it with Parliament. You're trying the information. They keep saying, I'm half an hour into this talk now. This is a very important point. So this is kind of like all those Donald Trump, fraud claims. And also, on YouTube, you've got this election misinformation. They call it election misinformation, but it's the fact that you can't use YouTube to intervene in the electoral process. Although when YouTube takes our videos down that are meant to be part of a petitioning process, even Parliament tell us to publish on these websites, YouTube's taking it down. So YouTube's breaking their own rules by intervening in the petitioning procedures. You're trying the information to Parliament to debate in the chamber. Now, I know some MPs are in the House of Commons, but that's not a debate in the chamber. And a lot of the time, they're saying, it contains libelous or defamatory or false information. Just a minute, you're trying the information like you try in the court. Isn't the judge and the jury supposed to decide? The Petitions Committee are rejecting a lot of things. They don't want to acknowledge it exists. And we're seeing this now with Biden, who almost doesn't want to debate Robert F. Kennedy or any of his other competitors. They're trying to deplatform them. They're telling YouTube to remove things. You're trying information. It's to be decided if it's true or not in the Palace of Westminster, in the debate, surely. The truth of the matter, surely, is to be debated, And if they reject it, they're not even actually, if they reject the petition, is that a decision that they don't agree with it? And is that almost like an alternative to having it debated? They don't, when you submit something for judicial review or, to a court, when you submit it, it needs to be accepted so they can officially look at it. When they reject it from being submitted, that's getting misconstrued and confused with looking at it and making an official decision on the matter, including whether the information is true or not, and if they are going to uphold your request, or just rejecting it. They can't. I know courts have got a process where, if you submit an affidavit or a claim to a civil court, but how often does a civil court turn down claims, even if you make a really, really basic one? The civil court procedure online, someone owes me some money, all you do is write a witness statement and send some receipts in. They get accepted on more dubious statements and evidence than these Parliament petitions. These ministers and MPs, they're using their own. They're meant to be elected to try this information for us, to represent us, and what they're doing is the political parties, and unfortunately even some independent MPs, I think they're against us the whole time. And I don't think that they even want to entertain this, because they don't want this to be published on the Parliament website and people to be able to read it and access it so they can make a decision whether they believe it's true or not, and they want to support it. And then when so many people say that it's true, they believe it's true, then Parliament debate it and make a decision on it and what they think. Not it gets rejected so it's not officially on there. You can ask people to sign a petition on 38 degrees and change.org. Parliament won't even publish it to collect the signatures. The signatures is there so people can examine it and see what they think. It would be almost like, I think, it's almost like Parliament want to get rid of the jury, because in a serious court case, the jury decide, and there's a lot of false statements that appear in court cases that get in there, or information that's not true. That's why the jury have got to decide on it. These ministers are just rejecting everything. They don't want it to actually enter the system. That's the problem. They don't really want it to enter the system, unfortunately. Because the whole point of trying the information is to have a proceedings, particularly with the public, have a right to access all manner of information, all manner of views for and against, in order to decide whether they want to sign it or not. And then on the weight of that, the MPs debate it on the evidence and the weight of what the public think. If they're going to censor all opinions to the contrary that set out the opposite view, or that whatever the claim is true, then what you're doing is they're effectively going around the country, and without any judicial procedure or argument, they're almost saying, we're going to say what the truth is. The government are going to say what the truth is, or these platforms are going to say what the truth is, and then everything will be erased and deleted. If that were the case, then why would you need court anymore? Because if they deleted and erased everything online, or everything published, or everything anywhere that they believe is not true, then nothing that you could obtain, read, or present would be contrary. So why would you go into a room or a court case to have a decision? And the fact that they want everything filmed now, security and surveillance everywhere. Oh, we know what happened. We've got the video footage. Nothing happened other than what this camera says or whatsoever. It's almost like they're trying to somehow make a reality where it runs like a computer program, and there is nothing questioning the program. There is no alternative view or thought be able to be published, formed in the mind, spoken or voiced. Therefore, that would eradicate not only the courts to try information in the contrary, it would eradicate Parliament, because really all decisions would be made and decided on these, what the entity wants to do, which is kind of what's happening now with this big corporate movement with all the... Well, I've had to change my phone now to the other phone. So what I was saying is that, no one has the financial capacity to challenge really what's going on with all these big developers. And it seems that all the council strategic planning and phases are all in line with that as well. People don't have the capacity to oppose it. And any platforms and social media are restricted or hindered, and they're attempting to do it even further. That's the big agenda at the moment politically, with Robert F. Kennedy and Marianne Williamson versus what the Biden administration and possibly even Trump were. And then you've got Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk. A lot of these platforms are using these terms like election misinformation. You're trying the information. YouTube are not a court of law, and neither are Facebook. They're not authorized to make judicial decisions. When we try information, it's for the public to read opposing views and make a decision. And if they want to support one view or the other, and then it's the way that's the whole point. Otherwise, you're going this binary, non-binary. They're almost wanting to trim all thought that could think of an alternative, But I need to try to get through this document because, I keep going off subject. But this is the history of petitions, and then we're getting into the development of petitions. I'll try to finish this part. We talked about the House of Commons began to appoint committees specifically to examine petitions, particularly those concerned with religious liberties. Well, there were all kinds of petitions going on, not just religious ones. The House was not always sympathetic to such petitions. Well, it won't. It doesn't even want us to. It vehemently doesn't even want to allow us to submit a strong case, or even a respectable case, or even any respectable evidence. It just completely wants absolute control of. Well, it won't let you submit links or evidence now. On the 10th of December 1640, for instance, the following entry is recorded. Well, I know that 1640 is around that time, just leading into the Civil War with Lord Saint-Seal and Warwick and Brooke and Strafford and so forth. Although I think Strafford was meant to be... I think Strafford got tried, but I think he was on the side of the Royalists, I'm sure. They found the petition on Salisbury Plain. Mr. Sergeant Hyde, Mr. Malloy, Mr. Hollis, Lord Digby, Sir Guy Palms, Sir Gilbert Gerard. Oh, is that who it's to, or the people who had signed it? Oh, this committee was appointed to pursue a petition that was enclosed in the cover of a letter. So we're getting onto it now. The petition addressed to the Parliament. It doesn't actually talk about Lord Saint-Seal, Warwick, or Brooke. Yeah, it's 1640. That's interesting, because I know they had a committee for petitions. There was enclosed in the cover of a letter addressed to the Parliament and found upon Salisbury Plain, and being, well, they've already said that, Salisbury Plain, and being brought to the Mayor of Salisbury, it was by him sent up to Sergeant Hyde. This is dubious, isn't it? You know, it's all too convenient. This is the thing back then, though. Pieces of paper found with, writings of people on, can they confirm the signatures or the information back then, Well, this is what everything was relied upon: witness, evidence and testimony. A member of this House, and by him this day offered to the House. The committee, after they had pursued it, found it of no better consequence than to be burnt. It doesn't actually tell you what it said. So they found the petition on Salisbury Plain, which is like the place of Stonehenge, which is an iconic prehistoric monument that predates the current ruling authorities. They're not too keen on these sites because it undermines the heritage, pedigree, history of the conquering lineage, for a start. And I think these were pro-royalist, likely pro-royalist members of the Lords, by the looks of it, and House, because they're not. This doesn't mention any of the people who were on the side of Cromwell, and I know that from reading that Peter Ackroyd book. The committee, after they pursued it, found it no better consequence than to be burned. Well, wouldn't we all wish that had happened to a lot of criminal charges and civil cases that are sent to courts, that we wish they'd burn them? But no, alas not. This, including this in this pamphlet, in this government document on petitions, again, it's bolstering and strengthening the cheek and the arrogance of the members of the petition committee, the MPs like Martin Day and so forth, who are actually treating us like this, claiming they don't know what the hell we're talking about when we explicitly write it, using detailed acts of law and what technical procedures we are wishing to invoke and use through legislation. By the time we finish writing that out, there's no room left to give the particulars of your own case, because you're having to justify that you can have this and it's something they can do. Or if you spend the most of your writing setting out your case and the facts, then they say, oh, no, it's not something you can do. So you're robbed of the available writing to write the particulars of the procedure and law that proves that you can do it. Found it no better. Oh, it's always about being better, isn't it? How convenient, the Petitions Committee found it no better than what their political parties want to do, found it no better than what their political parties believe, and found it no better than what they wish the public to have seen published on the Petitions Committee website, and obviously of no consequence at all to the Petitions Committee. In fact, I don't think anyone has tried to sue the Petitions Committee for issuing false statements, for claiming they don't know what it is when it's obvious what it is, for professional negligence. The Petitions Committee seem to be able to get away with anything now, always of no consequence, and clearly our knowledge and expertise is clearly no better than anything that they or their political party or leaders can come up with. So they often chuck them into the reject bin. So this is a clear example of the tone and the attitude of this paper, particularly back there, which I mentioned, when they're severely undermining that this is the main and primary method which precedes them and their committees, And I'll have to link this document so you can actually read it. By the restoration of the Crown, disorderly scenes resulting from mass presentations of petitions led to an act or against tumultuous petitioning, right? So they haven't mentioned the tumultuous petitioning act here. 13 CA2 chapter 5 in 1661. But let's remember that if you go on to the at this point, they hadn't published the tumultuous petitioning act itself on the legislation website, because I searched for it, the original as it is enacted. They care to actually disclose it here and mention it, yet it has not been available. They've got the Scottish version, the Petition of Right, but they didn't have the tumultuous one published in its full text on the legislation website. There was only that Wikipedia entry, which limited the presentation of a petition to a maximum of 10 people. Well, actually, it talks of 20 persons in that act, remember, as well. And there are certain other regulations around it as well. This act with amendments is still in force. Well, when was this PDF published? Because it says that it was abolished in 1986. It says that the Tumultuous Petitioning Act was abolished in 1986. Here it's claiming that it was still in force. Now, this fact sheet then, I don't think this fact sheet is from 1986. I'm sure it's not. Oh. The Government of Britain, Government's response to the Procedure Committee's first report, session 2006 on public petitions and early day motions. 2006. This could be false information. If this government advice sheet was published in 2006, if this, which is after the Gordon Brown, 6 years after the Gordon Brown government, 16 years after they abolished the Appeal Jurisdiction Act, and it's saying that it's claiming that the Tumultuous Act is still in force when it was abolished in 1986. Then this document contains false information and statements. We need to check this. If this government advice sheet is from 2006, if it is from around 2006, it's giving a false statement. We need to check this. It's trying to claim that the 1661 Act was still in force. It says this Act with amendments is still in force. So
the amendments actually, according to Wikipedia, the whole act was abolished. He's claiming that it's still in force with amendments, but it wasn't published on the Parliament website. On Wikipedia, it claims that it was abolished. In here, it says they amended most of it in 1986, and particularly about, and I don't think that number's right there, 10. Wasn't it 20? Isn't the number 20? I'm sure the number in the Tumultuous Act is 20. We'll need to check that. In the 16th and early 17th centuries, petitions generally dealt with personal or local grievances. This is not true. I don't actually believe this is true. I believe that this is false. I believe that it's saying personal or local. It's always a personal grievance. It's always a person. This is the context that they use the words in this. And at the moment, my phone's not focusing because I'm trying to concentrate on just what I'm reading it and saying. Every petition's personal. Every single petition is every single petition is personal because it's written by a subject, a member of the public, and they get people to support it. And every body in the country lives somewhere. They live in a local area. They're from somewhere, right? So they're a person from somewhere. How they're saying it is here. In the 16th and 17th centuries, petitions generally dealt with personal or local grievances. Every single petition, really, the law of the country, this is absolutely critical in fundamental logic, right? The legislation that is made in government and what the monarch does, everything has an effect on the country, and those effects are felt in an area. And if you're not from that area, you likely don't know what the effects are in another area unless you're constantly travelling around. And they're from a person. So this frames it. It's playing it down to local. It's trying to play it down the whole time. It's trying to talk the whole thing down into the local courts. And that's what they're trying to do with a lot of these prosecutions, wanting to deal with the protesters in the local courts. It's like that, but it couldn't be the more opposite. In fact, if you were a person from an area, it's near impossible for it not to be a petition to the king on important matters that affect you or your area. At the legislative or governance level, or some unlawful activity of judges or ministers, which are evil actions of judges and ministers, mismanagement, professional negligence, which the Act, the 1688 Act, in its opening part and in the first few clauses, specifically outlines. And those judicial people, evil judges or ministers, have been appointed by the king and sent to your area. So this is really, this is why we're right into, I'm glad we got into it. This is the exact type of writing and sentence writing and framing of these things that I want to draw attention to. And the parts earlier on that I pointed out, and this is why I don't like this government document. We'll have to check whether the Tumultuous Petitioning Act is still in force. I read that it was repealed, not only with amendments, and I don't think that it was 10. It mentions 20 number in there as well. We'll have to check that. I'm not saying I'm right or wrong on it, but I'm concerned about that. And this, the wording of this, finding no better consequence than to be burned. These ministers that we now elect, and they hold these right, they call each other right and honourable all the time. It's reduced the public to and how they don't even grant us even Dr. Tess Lowry, who submitted a petition, and she did achieve over 100,000 signatures. I mean, you can be clever in your wording, but you shouldn't have to be too creative in your wording just to try and squash your meaning into 50 words or 50 characters. They're trying to prevent you even bringing anywhere near as strong case as you might to a civil court. But then, they're saying matters, major matters reserved for Parliament. But yet with the major matters, we're insulted with how much... and they don't even really want it submitted, and they don't want people supporting it. They don't want, the Labour Party and the Conservative parties really don't want visibly it to look like a large number of people are in opposition to them or support things that they don't like, or information that even could suggest that the government haven't been doing the job right, or are even in fact lying, or might oppose us. They really don't like that at all. Even though we've got Rees Mogg on GB News, and MPs aren't meant to be on the news, and even the Select Committee said that, but he's vehemently Ofcom have got complaints to remove him from GB News, but he's just defiantly on there in absolute and complete defiance. Development of petitioning. In the 16th and early 17th centuries, petitions generally dealt with personal law. It would be all right if this was from the government, if they were certain, wouldn't it? This is meant to be the all-powerful government who know best, and they're still into generally, that they're still not sure themselves for certain, which, is not very, it's not showing much confidence themselves. Petitions generally dealt with personal or local grievances, but from the Restoration of the century, as the Commons' judicial functions ceased. So the Commons had judicial functions which stopped, but they've still got, the Lords still had judicial functions, which you had. The thing is, these committees were made up of not only lords, earls or barons, but members from both houses. So it's ridiculous to say that whether or not the Commons' judicial functions were removed, because a lot of committees that are to deal with things, particularly making some of those committees with Lord Say and Seal and so forth, they had members from the House of Lords and from the Commons in the committees. So if it has, I think, at least 3 members of the Lords in a committee, it can make judicial judgments, or actually refer them to the House of Lords chamber at least. I really don't think that really the judicial function has been removed from the House of Lords, because it wasn't created with the Judicial Appealite Jurisdiction Act. The Appealite Jurisdiction Act wasn't even required for any of that, for the appeals to the Lords, or even for a pardon. It became more common to make representations or complain about matters of public policy. Well, how can it just, if they've completely abolished, right? This is some logic here. If they've completely abolished, right, the Commons' judicial functions ceased, how can it only become more common to make representations or claim about matters of public policy? It's not more common to, either they had to, or, either they absolutely had no option. No, it's suddenly become more common, because, as I said, you can have committees in the Parliament that consist of committee members from both houses. So that is another, that's another thing to point out, what I don't like about how the way they write this. Petitions were traditionally read before the start of debates, and by the 1830s, this was taking up a considerable amount of time in the chamber. Well, why do we elect them? Not taking up as amount of time in the chamber until they started doing party politics, when they were only doing matters of what the party wants to do and not the local people. Won't be surprised if they have no more time left, and that's when they can even be bothered being present and even turning up to debates. Radical MPs often use the petitions system as a way of getting frequent, unscheduled debates on subjects on which they felt strongly. Radical MPs. Well, there aren't many radical MPs left when the main part of them are affiliated with the main political parties. You'd have thought Martin Day MP, if he was SNP, or independent MPs would have more radical opinions, but it seems they don't. Or Jeremy Corbyn, although he's been removed from his party. And he has to go independent representation now. Independence. Everyone feels strongly about things, or they won't be there in Parliament. And everyone who writes a petition and bothers to get 100,000 people to sign it, which is in greater excess than the number of support that many of these MPs got elected by, surely shows that's why you collect the signatures. You can have very, very compelling evidence that something is the case without question. But what do other people think about it? You know, if someone acted, if the police acted unlawfully and you want an inquiry, the evidence to show that might be undeniable. But, you know, will they hold the inquiry unless other people feel strongly about it, even if it's undisputed? You know, that means that it may go uninvestigated. You know, if it needs a public inquiry, if it's something questioning the authorities and so forth. It was also used as a way of obstructing government and other business as the debate preceded the main business of the day. Well, nothing stops the business now, because the councils refer to their meetings as business. We'll now do business. And all of the strategic planning is what the contractors want to do and what the government's pumping out. And Rishi Sunak, you know, he's got shares in BP, and then he changes the law, which makes him a lot of profit. It seems like it's all their business now. We don't really have any time for even publishing our matters, and they didn't even want to get the evidence attached. They don't want people to affiliate it with Parliament. They want it to be on 38 degrees or change.org. The committee's it was also nothing obstructs their business now. It's even when you object against these building developments now, they're just still approving them. Nothing stops this new corporate construction army that's coming through, and no one has got the money to stop it, and no one can use the platforms to affect anymore, with all the limitations on the platforms that they're limiting the number of messages you can send and so forth. And now they're even trying to say you don't have a right on the platforms over the platform, or the platform doesn't have to respect your rights. The average number of petitions presented annually to the Commons in 1785 to 9 was 176. Well, that's not really many. By 1811 to 1815, this had grown to over 1,000, and in the years 1837 to 41, this figure was almost 17,600. So there were a lot, although I don't think there was many changes in the law then, because although they had that Appeal Like Jurisdiction Act, maybe people were petitioning about legal cases or for pardons or appeals. So that's why maybe they made the Appeal Like Jurisdiction Act. That would make sense around this period. There was a few of them. There's 3 or 4 of those Appeal Like Jurisdiction Acts, but you never needed it. Be interesting to know how many signatures they got on these petitions. Here, look, in 1832, Sir Robert Peel engineered the establishment and of a select committee to investigate the presentation of petitions. Well, we could do with that now, to be honest, but I bet they don't have one for us. It's usually, this. We could do with a public privileges committee, not just a Parliament privileges committee. Engineered. It's all in engineering, isn't it? Engineered. It's all about building and business and engineering now. The committee's recommendations resurrected the idea first mooted in the Civil War period of establishing committees to examine petitions. That's interesting. The committee's recommendations resurrected the idea first mooted in the Civil War period of establishing committees to examine petitions. Well, didn't they say before, earlier on, that they first started doing that in 1751, a committee for motions of griefs of petitions was first appointed. That's 1571 was first appointed, so they must have had some committees from 1571. So why are they saying down here that that in the Civil War period they had committees, which we've got that evidence from that page of the book that I pointed out, with it names all the members of the committees in order to take them out of the chamber of the House. Its report was debated immediately after Parliament reassembled, but the government did not completely remove petitions from the floor of the House. Well, there's a petitions bag behind the Speaker's chair. That's where the petitions bag hangs behind the Speaker's chair. The petitions bag hangs behind the Speaker's chair. So, well, this is kind of, I don't like this, because the petitions committee is there to sort them out, and then they go into the bag which hangs on the Speaker's chair, and the chamber, they still get debated in the chamber. So it's trying to really, really squeeze them out of Parliament and make them sound unimportant, but did not completely remove the petitions from the floor of the House. Well, there's a bag behind the Speaker's chair that represents the petitions. That's what it represents, and all petitions are debated in there, and it's the committee that sorts them out, or meant to be how they get in the petitions bag. So this, again, is completely and totally undermining the whole thing and playing it down. I think this government paper plays down the whole thing. I've had to move to another room now because it wasn't quiet in there. I just wanted to get to this. I'm really a bit upset that it won't focus properly at the moment. So they're playing down, in order to take them out. The committee's recommendations resurrected the idea first mooted in the Civil War period of establishing committees to examine petitions. No, the petitions, the committees sort them. They have to be sorted, right? The petitions committee, in order to take them out of the chamber, they're debated in the chamber, and they can't all fit in the bag behind the Speaker's chair. That's symbolic. Its report was debated immediately after Parliament reassembled, but the government did not completely remove petitions from the floor of the House. Well, they hang in the Speaker's chair in a bag, and that's symbolic, and they're all debated in there, so you can't remove them from there, because you've got a right to petition the government, and they can't be sorted in the chamber, because you don't do that in the chamber. You don't sort them. You have to have a committee to sort them. They used to have the Lord of the Articles, or the Justices and Grand Jury. I'd be, did the Grand Jury and three Justices even sort them, or did they have staff to do that? Clerks, clerics, clerks. They didn't even sort them. They were never sorted in the chamber. They've always had staff in Parliament, or the King's always had staff. This is moot points, and it's undermining and underplaying the whole thing, and putting more. This is pro-minister. This is like an anti-citizen document, which is pro-minister supremacy, in my opinion, and I'm trying to call them out on it. Many radical members objected to any alteration in the procedure. Why would they be radical? How are they radical? Many radical members objected to any alteration in the procedure. Right there, right? Right here. If there's a procedure that had been well established and even predates Parliament and the forming of Parliament and ancient, archaic, age old, right? Wouldn't all the members who were formed in Parliament be very familiar with it and only there at the grace of the electors? And they were used to having to hear petitions. So why would anyone be radical who objected to it? They would be conservative. Anyone who objected to the procedure being altering surely would be conservative. They would be wanting to conserve the process. It would be radical to try and change it. This is we're right on. This is what I want to get to. This is my point. And this paper is written possibly somewhere around 2006 or before. And you have to check that, by the way. And it's coming out with all this. This is why we've got problems now, with YouTube and trying to say we can't say this. This type of it's propaganda, really. It's propaganda, and to me, this really is a demonstration of the attitude of the Parliament. These people are only there because we elected them. Largely upon the grounds that petitioning was the only form of redress open to the vast majority of people who were not electors. Well, what date was this? Are we talking 1832? Petitioning has always been there for the people of the country to petition the king, right? At least from Magna Carta and possibly before. Why would you be radical to object to something that is being altering, that is long established? Largely upon the grounds that petitioning was the only form of redress open to the vast majority of people, who were not electors. Well, they're all electors. They're all electors, and they're meant to be, the majority of people are electors. The majority of people are electors. It's the only form of redress open to the vast majority of people who are not electors. Well, do you know what that's trying to say? That's trying to make out that, why would anyone want to petition the government or be interested in doing anything that the MPs who you've elected aren't doing? Because that makes this, again, is kind of framing it like, if you've elected your MPs and clearly they're representing your concerns, so everything's taken care of, and the political parties will deal with it. Why would a vast majority of people want to do anything other than that? Why would they want to use this making it sound like unimportant or flimsy form of redress? Because at the end of the day, that's why you have a surgery with your MP. What could you talk to him about other than things that you want him to sort out in Parliament? The MP is your representative in petitioning the government. Who is your advocate? It's the surgery, the MP's surgery that you go see. He is the vehicle by which you don't need to write petitions, or you can get him to take them. He is almost like a person who's there to provide the service. Really, it's not really, and it's not the MP going to represent us in Parliament. That is what the petition is, representing a matter in Parliament by writing. You've just got a person there instead of just having a piece of paper. You've got an actual person, in my opinion. A committee was, however, established, and special morning, actually noon till 3 p.m, sittings were held to deal with petitions. Well, they actually had a special morning. These sittings lasted until 1835. After this, a rule appears to have been regularly applied to prevent debate arising out of petitions, which the Speaker enforced, although it was not a standing order. Well, they're just basically trying to undermine us again, although I believe this. Well, I mean, this is information that I believe this is a true account. I don't disagree with this. So basically, they've got the power. They can hear a lot more petitions, and they can accept more evidence from them, but they choose not to. So they're undermining us, basically. I'll go on to the last. This is page 7 now. It's called Public Petitions House of Commons Information Office Factsheet. That's what it's called. The Public Petitions House of Commons Information Office Factsheet. Debating the rules on the 7th of February 1838, Mr. Ward, a member for Sheffield, attempted to enter into a general discussion of the Corn Laws on the basis of presenting a petition from his constituents on the subject. He was interrupted by Speaker Abercrombie, who ruled him out of order, which was the usual practice. The rules. Well, why did he try then? If he thought he couldn't do it. The rules of the House concerning debate and petitions were then themselves debated on the following day, and the rule was upheld. However, the scale of the problem remained and proved rather overwhelming. In 1841, 18,648 petitions were presented. On 8th of February 1842 alone, for instance, 199 separate petitions were presented to the House, including one from passengers on Blackfriars Bridge. The record for numbers of petitions presented in any one session was set in. The record for numbers of petitions presented in any one session was set in 1843, when 33,898 were presented. Were they debated, though? Were they debated? That's the question. 33,898. That would have been an interesting live video to have watched. Following an unsuccessful attempt in early 1842 to rescind the rule, so this is not law then, is it? This is just like, it's almost like the Speaker when he sends them out for misbehaving and certain things like that. The government acted. After a debate on the 14th of April 1842, the House agreed by 268 votes to 46 to a government motion to introduce new standing orders relating to petitions. These precluded any debate on the merits of a petition following its presentation. This precluded any debate on the merits of a petition following its presentation, and this is essentially the current practice. So, but how can we even, this is, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but this is that they didn't actually make legislation, introduce new standing orders relating to petitions. Are these just their own rules they're making, but it's not an enactment of law, legislation? The right of the subject to petition the king and all, because all prosecutions and commitments are illegal. You can't be held to any commitments, because if they were trying to suppress or rule them out, it's taking away your right to have them heard. And it's holding, and these standing orders are commitments. It's why the rights were made to prevent that, right? Like with the Lord of the Articles and charging you money and fees. They were charging you monies and fees. It's a miracle they didn't start charging money again and fees to have them looked at. I think this is why in 1688 that law was made. Not only so they couldn't prosecute you, but charge you fees or monies, or even try and argue their way out of it or debate their way out of even having to hear them. And I think this is evidence again of being undermined when it precedes Parliament and it precedes getting elected officials. number of petitions. The end of the 19th century showed a marked reduction in the number of petitions presented. I'm not surprised if they're actually going to hear them anymore. Although some were signed by enormous numbers of petitioners. The Times in 1901 considered that whatever their practical utility, petitions would always have a sentimental value as keeping alive a popular right based upon one of the fundamental principles of British Constitution. Although it is really why we got people elected to represent us in person, and why we have a surgery in our local area to see our MP. That, I believe, is the truth of the matter. So we don't have to put it in writing and send it in. We actually have a person, an elected member of the government in our local area, our member of parliament, the emissary, the messenger, the representative. He is our right to petition, the vehicle for it. Surely that has to be the fundamental underlying. They're trying to separate it here. These are the matters that we want our MPs to talk about. Why do we elect them? You know, what this doesn't actually talk about, this paper, it doesn't discuss the corruption of ministers. It doesn't discuss the corruption of MPs and this is what Peter Ackroyd's book, Histories of England, Volume 3, was talking about, and it's a good job that I read that book. It tells you about how they started to form parties and sit together and go out together. You see, when they hang around in London, these people from local areas, to start with, these people were from a local area, so they would like and love their area and care about it and be interested in their local people. And then eventually when they start hanging around and staying in London for long periods overnight and getting into circles and forming their own political opinions and befriending each other, and then you got Rishi Sunak, who's, you know, now like Nancy Pelosi is, you know, gambling on the stock market and making money out of decisions in government. It's gone, it's all corrupt, and our cases to government are extremely undermined, and it's a strong legal action that is meant to have evidence, and they don't even want you to be able to write so many words. They're handicapping us. That's what they're doing. They're handicapping us, so we can't attach documents, or we're not able to submit a strong case, and they don't even want us to be able to, you know, they could have committees for these strong cases in the Parliament, like, you know, with having an inquiry, particularly when it's something like Extinction Rebellion. You know, would always have a sentimental value. Well, it's not sentimental. It is the primary and main method which has been hijacked. Belief in the efficacy of individual appeals to Parliament had not entirely died out, but if the man in the street could see how unceremoniously the ordinary memorial is dealt with, this belief would not survive long. Well, why? It's amazing. Well, on that point, then it's amazing we've still got a local surgery with the MP. It's amazing that we've got a local surgery, because the surgery is to present the matters in person. And you only get a 10-minute slot anyway. And I have yet to have my appointment. I made an appointment before the whole lockdown, and they shut down the whole process of seeing them. From the First World War onwards, possibly reflecting. This is why we've got those rights to protect it, and so it doesn't get brushed to the side. That's the point. From the First World War onwards, possibly reflecting such a sentiment, or possibly also the extension of the franchise, the number fell away almost to nothing. In a typical session of the 1970s, about 35 petitions were presented, though certain matters, for example, disabled persons' mobility in 1977, led to a large number of petitions. Well, this is probably why in 1986 they abolished that tumultuous act, or at least, as it claims in here, got rid of some of the provisions of it. On Wikipedia, it says it was abolished, so we need to check whether it was abolished or not. It wasn't even on the government website. I've asked them if they'll put it on there. So at this point, when they wrote this paper, the Act wasn't fully available to view in its original form, its entirety. And I had this on my computer, but I hadn't read all this, so I'd have probably found out about that tumultuous act earlier if I'd have read this earlier on. A great rise in the number of petitions occurred in the early 1980s. Subjects such as so it's saying it went back up in the early 80s. So it went down in the 70s, but then back up in the 80s. Proportional representation, contraception, abortion, or embryo research and capital punishment led to a large rise in petitions, some with huge numbers of signatures, in many cases dozens or hundreds of. So at that point, they probably, because they'd abolished they probably didn't require hundreds of thousands of signatures. But then if they're doing all these things about abortion and embryo research, then there were probably a lot of people signing. So, dozens and hundreds of petitions came from different areas. The numbers, for instance, presented 1983 to 84 was 764. That's still not that many compared to within the 35 or so, or 5 to 10 years before. That's through the 70s. By the end of the 1990s, around 100 petitions were being presented each session. Presented or debated. A table showing number of petitions presented in recent sessions is included as Appendix 1. So that's it. That's what I've been through. I mean, if you're in disagreement with me on that, then fair enough. But there are some... I still believe that the person who wrote this is pro sort of Parliament staff, pro MP superiority, pro political party, and not a great believer in the people's rights. The way it's written, some of this information is accurate though and useful. Forgive me where I'm wrong, but those are the things at least that I wanted to point out in this anyway.